The sun was burning high over the small town of Redstone when people gathered around the old wooden barn. The air was dry, filled with dust and chatter. It wasn't a normal day at all. Something strange was happening, something that made even the kind people uneasy. A young woman named Emily Carter stood on the wooden platform near the barn, her wrists bound in iron chains. Her blue dress was torn and her eyes were red from crying. She looked tired, lost, and full of shame. The crowd around her wasn't silent. Some whispered, others laughed cruelly. They were treating her like an object, not a person. The story had already spread through town. Her husband, a gambler with no conscience, had lost everything in a card game. When he couldn't pay, he offered his wife as payment. The men who won her brought her here to be auctioned, claiming she owed a debt. Emily couldn't understand how her life had come to this. Just a few months ago, she had dreamed of having a family, a home, maybe even a small garden with roses. Now she was standing under the sun, being watched like she was nothing. She tried to stay strong, tried not to cry again, but when she saw a group of men laughing and joking, she couldn't hold it in. Tears fell silently down her cheeks and disappeared into the dust. The auctioneer, a rough man with a loud voice, called out, "All right, gentlemen, let's get this over with. A good woman here knows how to cook, clean, and sew. Who'll start the bidding?" A few men whistled. Some shouted numbers just for fun, not meaning it. One old man spat on the ground and said, "She looks like trouble." "No use in that." The people laughed. Emily closed her eyes. Her heart pounded as she whispered to herself, "Please, God, send someone kind. Please don't let them hurt me anymore." That was when a shadow fell across her face. A tall man stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low and his face calm but serious. His name was Ethan Cole. He was a rancher who lived miles away from town, far from noise and gossip. He had only come that day to buy some supplies, maybe some new tools and a bag of feed for his horses. But what he saw made him stop in his tracks. He saw a woman who had been broken by life. He saw how people mocked her pain, how they treated her shame like entertainment, and something deep inside him stirred. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He had once known pain like that too. Ethan had lost his wife 6 years ago, right after she gave birth to their only child, Noah. The little boy survived, but he stopped speaking after her death. No matter how much Ethan tried, Noah stayed quiet. He would sit near the window, looking at the hills as if waiting for something that would never come. Ethan had prayed for years for something, anything that could bring life back into his son's eyes. And now, here in this crowd of cruel laughter, he saw a woman who looked as lost as he once had been. The auctioneer yelled again, "Come on, folks, $20 to start. She's young, strong, well, maybe not strong, but she can work." The crowd laughed again. Then a quiet but steady voice spoke from the back. "I'll take her." The crowd turned to see Ethan stepping forward. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. "You sure about that, mister? You don't even know her story." "I don't need to," Ethan said simply. "My son needs her." The laughter stopped. The air turned heavy. Nobody understood what he meant. A few men chuckled, thinking it was some kind of joke. But Ethan's face was calm, serious, and full of something no one else there had: compassion. He handed the auctioneer a few bills, took the key, and walked up to Emily. She looked up at him in disbelief. Her lips trembled as she asked softly, "Why are you doing this?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the chains on her wrists, then at her face. "Because you deserve better than this," he finally said. He unlocked the chains, letting them fall to the ground with a dull clink. Then he took off his worn brown coat and gently placed it around her shoulders. The crowd was silent now, unsure of what to say. Ethan helped Emily step down from the platform, guiding her to his wagon. She could hardly walk, her legs weak from fear and exhaustion. The people just watched as the wagon rolled away, the sound of horses fading into the distance. The road back to the ranch was long and quiet. The only sound was the creak of the wheels and the wind brushing through the dry grass. Emily sat silently, holding the coat tightly around her. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask where he was taking her, but she didn't know if she could trust him yet. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You don't have to be afraid. You're safe now." She looked at him carefully. "Why me?" she asked again. He kept his eyes on the road. "Because you remind me of someone I once lost. And maybe because my boy hasn't smiled in years." When they reached his ranch, the sun had already begun to set behind the hills. The sky turned orange and purple, and the air smelled like rain. Ethan helped her down from the wagon and opened the door to a small but tidy house. "You can rest here," he said. "There's food on the table and water in the kitchen. You can stay as long as you need." Emily stepped inside. The house was warm, filled with the smell of wood and something comforting. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. She sat by the fireplace, her hands trembling as she reached toward the heat. From the hallway came a small sound. She turned and saw a little boy standing there, half hidden behind the door. He had soft brown hair, curious eyes, and a quiet face. Ethan smiled gently. "That's my son, Noah." Emily smiled faintly. "Hello," she said softly. The boy didn't answer. He just looked at her for a moment, then disappeared back into the hallway. Ethan sighed. "He doesn't talk much. Lost his mother when he was little." Emily nodded slowly. "He looks gentle." "He is," Ethan said. "Too gentle for this world." He paused, looking at her. "Maybe you can help him find his voice again." That night, the rain came hard against the windows. Emily sat by the fire while Ethan fixed a broken chair. The sound of thunder rolled through the valley, but inside it was calm. She felt a strange peace in that silence. After a while, she said quietly, "You don't have to keep me here. I can leave in the morning." Ethan shook his head. "You'll stay until you want to go. I don't need anything from you. My son needs someone to talk to, and maybe you need someone to listen." Emily looked at him, then nodded slowly. She didn't know why, but for the first time in many months, she felt she could breathe again. In the next room, Noah peeked out again, watching the stranger sitting by his father's fire. He didn't say a word, but he stayed there quietly until he fell asleep against the doorway. Outside, the storm raged over the valley, but inside that small house, 3 lonely hearts began to find warmth again. Something unseen passed between them that night, a silent promise that maybe, just maybe, broken people could heal together. It was the beginning of a story that would change all their lives. The morning after the storm was calm and golden. The air smelled of wet earth, and sunlight spread over the wide-open land. Emily stood at the porch of the ranch holding a warm cup of tea that Ethan had prepared for her. The field stretched far beyond the hills, and horses grazed quietly near the fences. For a long moment, she just stood there feeling the peace she had forgotten existed. Inside the house, Ethan was already at work. He moved quietly, feeding the animals, checking the barn, fixing tools. Emily watched him through the window and felt something stir inside her. Gratitude. After all the pain she had endured, this man had shown her simple kindness. No promises, no demands, just quiet respect. When she walked into the kitchen, she saw the little boy sitting at the table drawing on a piece of paper. Noah didn't look up, but she noticed he had drawn 2 stick figures, a man and a woman standing beside a house. A third figure, smaller, was holding their hands. Emily smiled gently. "That's a beautiful picture," she said. Noah froze as if he didn't know how to react. He glanced up at her for a moment, then quickly looked down again. But she saw the small flicker of warmth in his eyes. That was enough. Day by day, life began to move slowly and calmly. Emily helped around the house. She cooked meals, washed clothes, mended the curtains, and made the place feel alive again. She hummed softly while sweeping. And sometimes Ethan would stop his work outside just to listen. Her voice reminded him of his late wife, gentle, full of heart, and warm like sunlight. One evening, Emily decided to make bread. The smell filled the whole house. When Noah came running inside after playing with the horses, he stopped and sniffed the air. For the first time, Emily saw him smile, a small, shy smile, but a real one. She placed a warm piece on his plate and said softly, "It's for you." He took it slowly and nodded. That night, he sat near her while she sewed an old blanket. He didn't speak, but his presence said enough. Ethan watched from the other room, his heart full of emotion. For years he had lived in silence, and now he could feel laughter trying to return to his home. As the days passed, Emily started planting flowers near the porch. She told Noah that flowers were like hope. You had to water them every day, even when they didn't bloom right away. He listened carefully, and every morning he would bring a small cup of water for the plants. One afternoon, while Emily was hanging laundry, Ethan came over holding a piece of wood. "Thought you might need a table for your sewing," he said, smiling awkwardly. She smiled back. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "I know," he said quietly. "But I wanted to." Their eyes met for a moment. There was a quiet understanding between them. Something gentle, something that didn't need words. Weeks turned into months. The three of them grew used to each other's presence. Emily often read stories aloud in the evenings. Even though Noah didn't talk, she could tell he was listening because his eyes always followed every word. But peace never lasts long without a test. One morning, when the sun was still low, the sound of horses' hooves echoed across the valley. Ethan stepped out of the barn and saw three men riding toward the house. He recognized them immediately. They were the same ones who had brought Emily to the auction months ago. They stopped near the fence, their faces hard and unfriendly. The leader, a tall man with a scar on his cheek, called out, "We've come for the woman. She still owes us money." Ethan's eyes darkened. "You sold her at the auction. You have no claim over her now." The man grinned. "We sold her, yes, but we didn't say she could disappear without a trace. She's ours by law, rancher." Emily came to the door, her face pale. She froze when she saw them. Memories of humiliation flooded back, but before she could step back, Ethan moved in front of her. "She's under my roof now," he said firmly, "and you're not taking her anywhere." The man laughed. "So you bought yourself a wife, huh? That's what this is?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No, I didn't buy a wife. I helped a person who needed it. And she stays because my son needs her." Something in his voice carried strength that even those men couldn't argue with. The leader spat on the ground and said, "We'll be back." Then they turned and rode away. When the sound of their horses faded, Emily's hands were still shaking. Ethan turned to her. "They won't touch you again," he said softly. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "You didn't have to stand up for me," she whispered. "Maybe not," he replied. "But I couldn't let anyone hurt you again." That night the house was quiet. The firelight danced across the walls as Emily sat near the window. She thought about everything. The cruelty of strangers, the laughter at the auction, and the strange kindness of this man who had given her safety. Ethan sat beside her. "You ever think about going back to the city?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "There's nothing for me there. This place, it feels like home." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Then stay. Not because I want you to, but because you want to." The next morning, the whole town started whispering. News spread fast about how the men had returned to the ranch and been turned away. Some people laughed, others shook their heads. But many began to see Ethan differently, not just as a quiet rancher, but as a man with courage and heart. A few weeks later, something wonderful happened. It was late evening, and Emily was reading aloud from a storybook while Noah sat beside her. As she finished the story, she said softly, "What do you think will happen next?" Noah looked at her, his lips moving slowly. Then for the first time in years, he whispered, "He'll find his way home." Emily froze, her eyes filled with tears. She looked toward Ethan, who stood by the door, speechless. Noah looked at both of them and smiled. "Mama," he said quietly. It was the word Ethan had longed to hear since his wife died. Emily covered her mouth and began to cry softly, pulling the boy into her arms. Ethan's eyes filled with tears too, though he turned away to hide them. From that night onward, everything changed. Laughter returned to the ranch. Noah began to talk more, to play outside, to smile. Emily taught him how to read and cook, and Ethan worked hard to keep the ranch strong. Together they became something that none of them expected, a family. Months later, the same town that once laughed at the auction gathered again, but this time for a wedding. It was held in a small chapel by the valley. Emily wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Noah stood proudly beside her holding a small bunch of flowers. When the preacher asked if she took Ethan as her husband, she looked at him with tears in her eyes and said, "Yes, because he gave me freedom when the world gave me chains." The townsfolk fell silent. Even those who had once mocked her felt something in their hearts. And when the ceremony ended, Noah ran up to Ethan and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Papa," he said. Ethan lifted him up, smiling through tears. "No, son. Thank her." Emily smiled through her tears as she looked at the crowd. The laughter that had once broken her spirit was gone. Now there was only respect. From that day on, people spoke of them with admiration. They said the lonely rancher who bought a chained woman had not bought her for labor or pride, but for kindness. And through that kindness, he found not only love, but a family that healed his heart. The wind across the plains carried their story for years to come, a reminder that even in a world full of cruelty, one act of compassion could change everything.